Hi everyone, it's Taehyung. I wanted to share something really personal with you tonight, something that's been on my mind and in my heart. I know you usually see me on stage, smiling, performing, always trying to be strong, but tonight I want to be honest, really honest, about what happened and what I realized through it. I woke up to the sterile scent of the hospital room before I even opened my eyes. The fluorescent lights reflected off the walls, harsh but strangely comforting, like a reminder that I was still here, still breathing, still alive. My chest felt heavy, my body weak, and yet my mind refused to slow down. It was racing with guilt, with fear, with the realization that I had let myself collapse under pressures I had convinced myself I could handle. Jungkook was sitting beside my bed, his face pale in the harsh light, eyes fixed on me with an intensity I hadn't realized I craved so desperately. He hadn't said a word since I was wheeled in, but I felt his worry, his fear, his desperation. It was suffocating and grounding all at once. When he finally reached out to take my hand, I barely had the strength to squeeze back, but I did, because I needed him. Needed to know that he was here, that I wasn't completely alone. I I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I could feel the lump in my throat growing, threatening to choke me. Jungkook shook his head, eyes glistening, voice trembling. Stop apologizing, just stay alive. The room went silent, but it wasn't the calm silence I had been used to. This was raw, painful, unbearable. Every heartbeat echoed against the walls. Every shallow breath seemed to hang in the air like a fragile thread. I wasn't just lying here with my body in danger. I had almost shattered something far more fragile, the people who loved me, who depended on me, who carried pieces of me without ever complaining. Minutes later, Suga, Jin, J-Hope, and Taehyung himself, my anchor, my brother, entered the room quietly, eyes filled with the same fear I was trying to hide from everyone. They formed a protective circle around me without a word, their presence more powerful than any speech could be. I realized in that moment how close I had come to losing more than just my own life. I had been putting their peace, their sense of stability, their very hearts at risk by pretending I was invincible. I took a slow, shaky breath, and then another. Taehyung rested his hand on my leg gently, softly, as if his touch could absorb some of the chaos in my chest. We're going to get through this, he whispered. His voice carried a quiet authority, not commanding, not fearful, just unwavering. J-Hope nodded beside him, eyes glistening. You're not alone, he added, voice soft but firm. Jin squeezed my ankle gently. You are too important to all of us. Suga, silent but steady, rested a hand on the railing of my bed. Let us help you this time, he said quietly. Jungkook slid his hand back into mine, intertwining our fingers as if anchoring both of us to the moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, I exhaled and let their presence seep into the parts of me that had been starving for care without even realizing it. I didn't need to be strong. I didn't need to pretend. I could just be human. The hours passed slowly. Even with nurses coming in and out, machines beeping steadily, and sunlight shifting across the walls, time felt different, stretching. accommodating the weight of everything I had been ignoring. My mind wasn't focused on schedules, rehearsals, deadlines, or performances. It was focused entirely on the people around me, sitting there, guarding something more precious than any stage, me. Suga pulled the chair closer and sat down, elbows resting on his knees. You used to push yourself the hardest, he said softly. Even when you were falling asleep mid-dance, you forced yourself to go again. I remember those nights, the squeak of sneakers on the practice room floor at 3 a.m., the cold air from the broken AC, the burning ache in your legs. You never wanted to disappoint anyone, but you never realized you never had to. I lowered my head, the lump in my throat, making every breath a labor. Jin adjusted the blanket over me, his touch almost parental, reassuring in a way that made my chest ache. You don't realize how much you mean to people, he murmured. Not just us, but fans, staff, everyone who sees you perform. You think you're ordinary, but you're not. And that's why you need to take care of yourself. Because if you break, a lot of things break with you. His words were gentle, warm, but they cut through me like ice. For years, I had believed that protecting others meant sacrificing myself, that being the emotional pillar meant absorbing everyone else's burdens silently, and that strength meant never showing weakness. And for the first time, I saw the truth. All of that had been slowly killing me. A nurse came in shortly after with new medication and updates from cardiology. They scheduled an echocardiogram to see how much strain my heart had endured. Jungkook listened intently, memorizing every word as if holding it in his mind could somehow shield me from danger. When the nurse left, he went to the window, gripping the curtain like it was the only anchor to reality. Slowly, he let go, pressing his palms against the window sill, head lowered. He's taking this harder than he lets us see, Taehyung whispered. I knew. I could feel it. Jungkook always carried his emotions like a storm inside him, loving intensely, caring intensely, worrying intensely, and when he felt powerless, when he couldn't protect me, he broke just as intensely. I reached for his shoulder, my voice soft. You're here, I whispered. He didn't look at me immediately. When he did, the raw devastation in his eyes made my chest tighten painfully. I thought I was too late, he said quietly, voice breaking. I didn't know if I could make it here in time. You weren't too late, I assured him. I'm right here. He swallowed hard, struggling with the weight of everything he had been holding inside. I know, but that doesn't erase what happened. The room felt too small, too full of unsaid words, of fear, guilt, love, and helplessness. RM moved to his side, placing a hand on his back. You don't have to carry this alone, he said softly. I'm not, Jungkook replied, but his strained voice betrayed him. Suga's quiet authority broke the tension further. We all need to stop pretending we're invincible. This isn't just about him, it's about all of us. We've been ignoring our limits for years, burning ourselves out. But this time, we almost lost someone. The weight of those words pressed against my chest. My apology felt hollow. You don't need to apologize, RM said gently. Promise us you'll listen. When your body says stop, When your mind says rest, when we tell you to slow down, you'll follow. Promise you'll talk to us when it's hard. Instead of hiding it, promise you'll stay with us. Not just here, physically, but really stay. Jungkook walked slowly back to my bedside, gripping my hand with desperate firmness. Promise you won't disappear on me, he whispered. My heart ached. I whispered back, I promise. The nurse returned, wheeling me out for the echo. The members didn't leave my side. They followed like shadows, guardians, family, and for the first time since everything began, I realized I wasn't surviving alone. I hadn't collapsed alone. And I wouldn't heal alone, not this time, not ever again. The echocardiogram room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the monitor and the clinical overhead lights. It smelled faintly of disinfectant, but that didn't matter. All I could register was Jungkook's presence, standing close enough that I could feel the heat of him even without touching. He didn't sit, he refused. He hovered beside me, his eyes tracing every movement of the technician, like he could somehow shield me from the procedure with sheer focus. The cold gel on my chest made me flinch, and I felt Jungkook inhale sharply as if it had touched him too. I gave him a small, shaky smile, but he didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he pressed a hand against the wall behind him, grounding himself, holding himself together as if he needed to be strong for both of us. The technician began the test, gliding the one across my chest, the monitor lighting up with images of my heart pumping, struggling, surviving. I stared at it, mesmerized and terrified at the same time. It wasn't strength, it wasn't heroism. It was survival, raw and stubborn, fighting against an invisible weight I had carried for years without admitting it to myself. I could see the tension radiating from Jungkook, how tightly he gripped his own hands, how each inhale seemed calculated. He was holding himself together for me, but I knew the walls were crumbling. When the technician finally finished, the gel wiped away, Jungkook didn't move. He simply stared at the empty monitor, exhaling slowly, trying to control the emotions threatening to spill over. I wanted to reach out, to pull him close, to tell him it was okay to break, but I didn't. Instead, I let him breathe, let him process, let him exist in this quiet vulnerability that rarely surfaced. You know, he said finally, voice low, barely above a whisper, I never thought I'd see you like this. Like what? I asked softly, though my voice cracked the moment it left my throat. Scared, he admitted. The word hung heavy in the air, suffocating, unavoidable. Terrified, I swallowed, ashamed. I had been trying to pretend that exhaustion was just part of the routine, that collapsing wasn't a real threat. But here he was, looking at me with pure, unfiltered fear, and I couldn't deny it any longer. I, I am, I whispered, I really am scared. He closed his eyes, letting the confession sink in. You don't have to be brave with me, he said gently. Not right now, not ever, if you don't want to. Something inside me cracked open, a dam I didn't even realize existed, breaking quietly, almost painfully. The truth I had buried under rehearsals, under deadlines, under the constant need to appear invincible, spilled out in the simplest of forms: fear, vulnerability, humanity. The door opened then, and Dr. Han stepped in, tablet in hand, clinical yet gentle. Jungkook's posture shifted instantly, a protective mask forming over his face, hiding the raw vulnerability I had just witnessed. Taehyung, she began softly, I have the results. My pulse quickened. My heart had already been screaming at me for weeks, but hearing it from someone else made it real, tangible, terrifying. The good news, doctor, Han continued, is that your heart structure is normal. There's no permanent damage at this time. Relief flooded through me, quick and shallow, not quite enough to fill the holes that fear had dug in my chest. Jungkook's shoulders dropped slightly, but her words didn't end there. There are signs of strain that cannot be ignored, she said gently. Your heart is under more stress than it should be for someone your age. This level of tension doesn't appear overnight. It builds silently, and often the person doesn't notice until the body forces them to. I swallowed hard, the weight of reality pressing down on me. Jungkook's reaction mirrored my own terror. He exhaled shakily, brushing his hand against the wall as though grounding himself, trying to process the severity of the situation. What does that mean for me? I asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. It means rest, Dr. Han said firmly but kindly. Not just a day or a week, a proper break. You need to reduce the pressure you put on yourself. Sleep consistently, hydrate, nourish your body, let your mind recover. You cannot push beyond human limits. Not anymore. Jungkook's inhale was sharp, almost involuntary, as if the words were directed at him too. His gaze fell on me, filled with something I could only describe as raw desperation. You need to take this seriously, he said. His voice trembled, controlled yet fragile. I know, I whispered. No, he interrupted, voice firm now, breaking slightly at the edges. Really seriously. Not an I'll try, not an I'll do better. The real thing. You can't do this to me again. I can't watch you collapse again. I can't live with that fear. Tears pooled in my eyes. I reached for him, placing my hand over his. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He needed the contact, the reassurance that I was still here, still real, still alive. You matter to me, he said softly, voice breaking. More than I knew, more than I was prepared to admit. Seeing you like this, I realized losing you would break me in ways I don't know how to recover from. The truth hit me like a physical blow. His vulnerability, his love, his fear, it wasn't just emotional weight. It was an anchor, a mirror, a lifeline. I intertwined our fingers, silent acknowledgement of the depth between us. Please don't go anywhere, he whispered. Not yet, not ever. I'm not going anywhere, I promised, my voice barely audible. Promise? I promise, he replied, exhaling slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. The nurse returned to wheel me back to my room. The members fell in step behind, silent, protective, like shadows in a sunlit corridor, carrying their own anxieties, yet focused solely on me. The hospital lights reflected off their faces, showing a combination of exhaustion, fear, and unspoken love. When we returned, the sun had begun to set. Faint streaks of gold painted the sterile walls, a small reminder of life beyond the hospital. The members surrounded me again, but the atmosphere was heavier, each of us carrying a piece of the anxiety, the realization, the fragility that had defined the last few hours. RM quietly stepped outside with Dr. Han. Jungkook's eyes narrowed with concern, pacing the room, tension visible in every movement. He muttered under his breath, "What is he doing?" "I think he's clarifying the plan," Suga said softly. Minutes crawled by. Jungkook's pacing intensified. I reached for his hand. "It's okay," I whispered. "They're probably just getting details." "No," he said sharply. "I can feel it. Something's wrong." The door finally opened and RM returned, calm but serious. Jungkook's posture stiffened, eyes narrowing. "What did she say?" RM motioned for everyone to sit. "She said Taehyung need at least a few weeks of real rest. No rehearsals, no heavy schedules, no physical strain. If the plan isn't followed, there's a real risk of long-term damage. Heart complications, arrhythmias, hypertension, possible long-term weakness. We were lucky it wasn't worse. The stress had been building for months." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jungkook's hands curled into fists. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His face, usually so composed, was open, exposed. Tears threatened, but he didn't let them fall, not in front of us, not yet. "You always carry everything alone," he said finally, voice cracking. "You always smile, pretend you're okay, but you're not, and you haven't been for a long time. I'm scared for you. I can't sleep. I can't live with that fear. I can't lose you." I pressed my shaky hand against his. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He squeezed it tightly. "Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, and for the first time, the tension in the room began to ease, just fractionally, as if that single promise could hold us both together. The members sat quietly, Suga in a corner, Jin wiping discreetly at his own eyes, J-Hope offering silent comfort to Taehyung. Even RM exhaled, weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. And I lay there, surrounded by people who loved me, realizing for the first time I wasn't fighting exhaustion, stress, or my body alone. I was fighting the idea that I had to endure everything alone. That night, the hospital room was a sanctuary, a small but tangible reminder of the love and care I had long ignored. The room felt quieter after the news, but not in a peaceful way. It was a heavy quiet, the kind that presses down on your chest and refuses to let go. Jungkook didn't sit. He remained standing near my bed, one hand resting on the rail, knuckles white from gripping it, his body tense yet unwavering. His eyes never left me, and I realized something I hadn't admitted before. He was terrified not for himself but for me. The machines beeped steadily, the sound a constant reminder of my fragility, every beep synchronized with the pounding of my heart, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down. Not the kind that comes from obligations or schedules, but the unspoken kind, the kind that comes from people who love you so deeply they feel your pain as if it were their own. "I can't lose you, Taehyung," Jungkook whispered again, his voice breaking, raw, and unfiltered. I I don't know how I'd survive if I did. I wanted to tell him that I would be okay, that my body could recover, that the stress could be managed, but I couldn't lie. Not now, not with him standing there, showing every fragment of his soul in his eyes, in the tension of his shoulders, in the way his hands trembled ever so slightly when he pressed them against the bed. I'm here, I said quietly, voice soft but steady. I'm not going anywhere. His chest rose and fell quickly. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening with emotion, and for a moment the world outside the hospital walls seemed to disappear. The beeping machines, the faint smell of disinfectant, even the low murmur of the nurses passing by, it all faded. There was only us, suspended in a fragile bubble of fear, love, and unspoken words. RM leaned against the wall, observing quietly, his expression unreadable but attentive. Suga sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, watching silently with a mixture of concern and quiet authority. Jin rubbed the back of his neck, eyes tracing my movements with subtle, careful precision. J-Hope stayed close to Jungkook, as if ready to catch him should he falter. And Taehyung? No, me. I lay there, acutely aware of the gravity of the moment, of the vulnerability that had been building inside me for months, years even, now laid bare before the people I loved most. The hours passed slowly, each moment stretched thin by the weight of reality. Nurses came and went, updating charts, adjusting IVs, offering quiet reassurances, but it felt like the room existed in a space apart from time. Jungkook remained at my side, leaning slightly against the wall now, arms crossed, head tilted toward me, but he hadn't left my side for a single second. I tried to rest, tried to close my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying rehearsals, schedules, deadlines, performances, and the countless moments I had pushed myself past limits I shouldn't have. And then, above it all, I kept hearing Jungkook's voice soft, broken, filled with fear. I can't lose you. I can't. I realized painfully that my collapse wasn't just a wake up call for me. It was a shockwave that hit everyone around me. And the realization cut deeper than any exhaustion, deeper than any physical strain. I had underestimated the weight I carried, not just my own, but the emotional burden I imposed on those who loved me silently, without complaint. Suga shifted slightly in his chair, speaking softly, almost to himself. We've ignored our limits for too long, pushed too hard. It almost cost us Taehyung. Jin nodded, fingers tapping against the armrest of his chair. Not just him, all of us. We all need to stop pretending we're invincible. It's not strength if it breaks you. J-Hope's hand brushed against Jungkook's shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort and support. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his tension easing fractionally, but not disappearing. He looked down at me, eyes glistening, and whispered, "You have to listen this time, not just a little, not for a day or a week. Really listen. Take care of yourself." I tried to speak, to reassure him, to tell him I would follow the doctor's orders, but the words got caught in my throat. The truth was, I didn't know if I could. Years of habit, of pushing through pain and exhaustion, had ingrained a reflex that made me ignore my limits, ignore my own body, ignore myself. Jungkook must have sensed my hesitation because he leaned closer, voice low, trembling with emotion. I can't watch you suffer again. I can't handle another phone call saying you're in a hospital bed. I can't survive that fear again. I won't. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and unwanted, as I reached out to brush them away. He caught my hand instinctively, holding it firmly as if anchoring both of us to the moment. I need you to promise me, he said, voice breaking. I promise, I whispered, barely audible, but the words were enough. Enough to make him relax, if only slightly. Enough to make me realize that I didn't have to face this alone anymore. The day continued like that, slow, tense, filled with quiet observation, sporadic murmurs, and the occasional soft reassurance from RM or Suga. Every glance, every touch, every breath felt heightened, almost sacred. I realized that this was what it meant to be held, truly held, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. By late afternoon, the initial shock began to fade, replaced by a fragile sense of understanding. The test results were clear, the danger was real, and the path forward was simple in theory but complicated in practice. Rest, recovery, self care, and listening, not pretending, not overextending, not ignoring. Jungkook didn't leave my side for a single moment, even when Dr. Han returned briefly to clarify details. He stood quietly beside me, nodding at the doctor's instructions, absorbing every word, and then turning his attention fully back to me. His presence was grounding, his worry palpable but not oppressive. I watched him, studying the way he moved, the tension in his jaw, the way he held his breath when the doctor discussed limits and restrictions. And I understood something fundamental. He loved me in a way that wasn't always visible, a way that carried as much weight as my own heart beating erratically in my chest. His fear, his care, his insistence that I survive, it wasn't just emotional support. It was a tether, a lifeline I had ignored for too long. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed to a softer glow and the sun began its slow descent outside the window, I lay in bed and watched the members settle around the room. Some perched on chairs, others leaned against walls, and Jungkook remained close, his hand never straying far from mine. There was no need for words, their presence alone was reassurance. I realized then that this wasn't just about my body or even my career. It was about trust, vulnerability, love, and recognition of limits. My collapse had been a warning, yes, but also a revelation. A reminder that survival wasn't just about enduring alone, it was about allowing others to help, to care, to share the burden that I had carried in silence for too long. Jungkook squeezed my hand gently, as if confirming that he understood my unspoken realization. I'm here, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere. You won't be alone in this. Not now, not ever. And for the first time since the collapse, I believed him. Not because he said it, but because he showed it with every glance, every subtle motion, every quiet, unwavering moment of presence. I wasn't alone. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't unworthy of care or concern. The hospital room, once sterile and cold, now felt strangely warm, held together by the presence of people who refused to leave, who refused to let me face the consequences of my own neglect alone. And in that warmth, I felt something shift inside me, a tentative, fragile acceptance that strength didn't mean isolation, that vulnerability didn't mean weakness, and that sometimes survival meant leaning on the people who loved you most. The sun set fully outside, painting the room in faint amber streaks. The monitors hummed steadily. The members remained, shadows and guardians intertwined in quiet vigilance. And I understood something essential. This was just the beginning of real healing, not just for my body, but for my heart, my mind, and my understanding of what it meant to be supported, to be loved, and to be human. The night felt impossibly long, even as the hours crept by slowly. My body was exhausted, every muscle aching from the strain that had led me here, but my mind refused to rest. Every moment of consciousness was filled with the weight of reflection, the echo of fear, and the sharp, undeniable presence of Jungkook by my side. He hadn't left. He had not blinked. He had not faltered. It was as if he had made a silent vow in that hospital room to stay with me, and I could see it in every subtle movement, every glance that lingered too long, every deep exhale that betrayed his own exhaustion. I tried to close my eyes, to surrender to sleep, but each attempt was broken by the memory of my collapse the seconds before I lost consciousness, the panic in Jungkook's voice, the terror in RM's eyes, the quiet yet unwavering vigilance of the others. I had always known they cared for me, but seeing it distilled into such a pure, raw form of fear and love, I realized I had underestimated just how deeply I mattered to them. And to Jungkook, his fear wasn't just concern, it was desperate, it was palpable, and it scared me more than the collapse itself. He shifted closer, his hand brushing mine unconsciously, and I felt the need to reassure him, to anchor him as much as he anchored me. "I'm okay," I whispered, though my voice carried the faintest tremor. "I'm still here." His fingers intertwined with mine, firm and insistent, like an unspoken promise that he wouldn't let me slip away again. "Don't say that," he murmured, his voice low, almost a growl. "You can't disappear on me. Not now, not ever." The room, dimly lit by the hospital lights, felt smaller somehow, filled with the weight of our emotions, the silent understanding that our lives were irrevocably intertwined. Each member had found their own space, a quiet vigil, but the presence of all of them pressed against me in a comforting, protective cocoon. Suga sat in the corner, arms crossed over his chest, his gaze steady yet heavy with unspoken concern. Jin leaned back against the wall, rubbing his temple as if trying to massage away the panic he had felt earlier. J-Hope hovered near the doorway, alert and ready, while RM paced softly along the edges, checking monitors and charts with quiet urgency. I realized that my collapse had not just been a personal crisis, it had been a collective one. My body had given a warning, but my heart, my mind, and my soul had signaled to everyone who loved me that I had been neglecting myself for far too long. Every exhausted breath, every fluttering heartbeat, every fleeting pain I had ignored for the sake of schedules, rehearsals, and perfection had been felt by them too. And Jungkook's presence made it impossible to hide anymore. He leaned closer, voice trembling slightly as he whispered, I can't. I can't go through that again. I can't handle losing you. Not like this, not to exhaustion, not to stress, not to anything. His words cut deeper than the physical pain I had endured. They were rooted in raw vulnerability, a fear that he hadn't allowed himself to feel openly before. And in that fear, I saw the reflection of my own failings, the mistakes I had made, the signs I had ignored, the boundaries I had refused to acknowledge. I had thought I was invincible. I had thought that endurance equaled strength. But in that hospital room, surrounded by the people who loved me most, I understood that strength was not silent suffering. Strength was survival. Yes, but survival together with the people who cared enough to fight alongside you. I tried to speak again, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached out, resting my hand over his, feeling the tremor beneath his fingers. I hear you, I whispered. I promise I'll do better. I'll listen. I won't push myself past limits anymore. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening with unshed tears. Promise me, he said, his voice breaking, fragile and desperate. Promise me you won't disappear on me, that you'll take care of yourself, that you'll stay here with us with me. I nodded slowly, the gravity of the moment settling into my chest. I promise, I said again, this time firmer. I'll stay, I'll rest, I'll recover, I'm not going anywhere. Jungkook exhaled shakily, the tension in his body easing slightly as if the simple act of hearing my words had allowed him a fraction of peace. He leaned back against the wall, fingers still entwined with mine, and finally allowed a small, exhausted sigh to escape. For a moment, we simply existed like that, connected, vulnerable, human. Time seemed to stretch and bend in the hospital room. The machines continued their steady beeps. Nurses came and went with gentle reassurances, and the members maintained their quiet vigilance. Each glance, each subtle gesture, each measured breath felt imbued with unspoken love and care. I realized then that this was the truest form of support, not loud declarations, not dramatic acts, but quiet, unwavering presence, the kind that holds a space for you when you are too weak to hold it for yourself. Suga finally broke the silence, his voice calm but carrying quiet authority. We've all ignored our limits for too long, he said softly. But seeing you like this, it's a wake-up call. For all of us, strength isn't pretending nothing is wrong. Strength is knowing when to rest, when to listen, and when to lean on others. Jin nodded in agreement. And Taehyung, you're not alone in this. We've got you. We've always got you. Not just as a performer, not just as a friend, but as part of this family. J-Hope added softly, you're important, more than you realize, and we won't let you ignore that anymore. Their words were comforting, but they also carried a sting of truth. For so long, I had convinced myself that taking care of myself was secondary to taking care of everyone else. That being strong meant absorbing everything silently, never showing weakness. But here, in this sterile hospital room, surrounded by people who refused to let me carry that burden alone, I realized just how dangerous that belief had been. The nurse returned briefly with my medication, confirming the schedule and the next steps in my recovery. Dr. Han had left after giving us explicit instructions for rest, hydration, and nutrition, her words precise but gentle. The weight of her advice lingered in the room like a tangible presence, a reminder that my body needed attention I had long neglected. Jungkook remained at my side through it all, watching me, supporting me silently, his own exhaustion evident but secondary to his concern for me. At one point, he leaned closer, pressing his forehead gently against my hand. You don't have to be brave, he whispered. Not with me, not now, not ever. And in that simple act, the walls I had built around myself, walls of endurance, pride, and silent suffering, began to crumble. I realized that being cared for didn't make me weak, it made me human. It made me capable of surviving not just the physical strain, but the emotional and mental burdens I had carried alone for so long. The evening passed slowly. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the window. The room felt warmer, softer, imbued with the presence of the people who loved me unconditionally. RM checked monitors periodically, pacing quietly along the edges, while Suga and Jin remained seated, alert and vigilant. J-Hope leaned against the windowsill, and Jungkook stayed close, hands still lightly touching mine, as if to anchor me to the reality of our shared survival. And I understood something crucial. This moment, this night, wasn't just about recovering from a physical collapse. It was about learning to accept help, to allow love and concern to enter spaces I had long kept closed. It was about realizing that my survival wasn't a solitary journey, but a shared one, intertwined with the hearts and minds of those who refused to let me fall. As the room settled into a quiet rhythm, I felt a tentative, fragile peace. It was not complete, not yet. The road ahead would be slow, careful, filled with boundaries I had to learn to respect, and with the constant reminders of the limits I had once ignored. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. Not truly. Jungkook squeezed my hand once more, and in that small gesture, I felt the weight of all my fears ease slightly. We'll get through this, he whispered, together, always. And for the first time since the collapse, I believed him. Not just in words, but in the quiet, steadfast presence of the people who refused to let me carry everything alone. Not just in this hospital room, but in every heartbeat, every breath, and every fragile, precious moment that stretched ahead. The hospital room had quieted into a fragile calm, but the air was thick with unspoken thoughts, the kind that hung around like invisible weight. I lay back against the crisp white sheets, still hooked to the monitors, still under the watchful eyes of the members. Their presence was like gravity, holding me steady even when my own body wavered. I tried to let myself relax, to surrender into the care surrounding me, but every attempt was interrupted by flashes of the collapse, the pale color of my lips, the trembling of my hands, the distant panic in Jungkook's voice when he realized how close I had come to nothingness. Jungkook hadn't moved from the chair beside me. His arm rested lightly on the rail of my bed, his fingers brushing mine in a subtle, constant reassurance. I can't imagine a moment without knowing you're okay, he whispered, his voice low, almost breaking under the weight of the emotions he refused to hide. I was terrified, absolutely terrified. I exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in. The truth was undeniable. I had pushed myself too far. I had ignored every warning my body sent, each ache and flutter of exhaustion dismissed in favor of schedules, rehearsals, and expectations. I had always believed endurance was the ultimate measure of strength, but now, with Jungkook's worry pressing against me like a tangible force, I realized that strength wasn't silence, it was survival. And survival required care, boundaries, and the presence of those who refused to let you carry everything alone. The members moved around the room quietly, each finding a spot that allowed them to remain vigilant without crowding the space. Suga sat in the corner, silent as ever, but his steady gaze was a tether. Jin leaned back against the wall, head tilted, watching the monitors, but also watching me with an intensity that made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't allowed for years. J-Hope stayed near the window, eyes flicking between the monitors and my face, alert, cautious. RM paced softly, glancing at the charts, calculating, planning, ensuring that everything was as controlled as possible. And Jungkook stayed close, tethered to me physically and emotionally, the constant reminder that I was not alone. I tried to move, to adjust in bed, but even the smallest motion brought a sharp reminder of weakness. The monitors beeped steadily, each pulse a stark reminder that my heart, strong as it had always been, was not invincible. Jungkook's hand tightened slightly around mine, a silent warning, and I immediately relaxed again, surrendering to the care being offered. Taehyung, he whispered, leaning closer. I need you to hear me. I don't care about schedules, rehearsals, nothing. All I care about is you staying here with us alive. You hear me? Alive. The raw intensity of his words made my chest tighten. I wanted to respond with something witty, something to reassure him that I was okay, but the truth caught me mid breath. I wasn't okay, not fully. I was fragile, physically and emotionally, and the realization was both terrifying and grounding. I nodded slowly, letting him know without speaking that I understood. Jungkook exhaled a long breath, his shoulders sagging slightly as he allowed a moment of vulnerability to surface. I was so scared, he admitted quietly, almost to himself. I didn't know if I would get to see you again, if I would get to tell you I love you, if I would get to just be here with you. The words pierced me in a way nothing else could. It wasn't just fear, it was raw, unfiltered care, the kind that demanded a response not with words but with presence. I squeezed his hand back, silently communicating that he wasn't alone either, that his fear, his worry, his care were reciprocated, shared, mutual. The hours passed in a slow, measured rhythm. Nurses came in periodically, checking vitals, administering medication, adjusting IVs. Each time, Jungkook's attention never wavered. He stood near the bed when necessary, sat close when allowed, his presence a constant reassurance that I was not navigating this alone. The other members continued their quiet vigilance, their subtle glances, half smiles, and careful movements forming a shield around me. At some point, Suga spoke, his voice low but carrying weight. We need to be honest with ourselves, he said softly, almost to the room rather than to me specifically. We've all been ignoring limits, pretending we're invincible. But tonight was a warning, not just for Taehyung, but for all of us. This is what happens when exhaustion, stress, and pressure accumulate unchecked. Jin nodded in agreement. And we can't let it happen again. We need to take care of each other, not just on stage, not just for the fans, but for ourselves. J-Hope added quietly, we've all been pushing too hard, pretending strength means silence. But we've learned tonight that strength also means vulnerability, honesty, and care. Taehyung, you showed us that by collapsing, by letting yourself be human, you reminded us what really matters. The words were comforting, but also sobering. They reflected a truth I had resisted for years, the idea that survival, health, and connection were just as important, if not more so, than perfection, endurance, and public appearances. I felt Jungkook's fingers squeeze mine again, grounding me in the moment. Promise me, he said quietly, voice trembling. Promise me you'll take care of yourself. No rehearsals, no schedules, just rest. Let me worry, let us worry. You don't have to do it alone anymore. I promise, I whispered, the weight of the words carrying more than reassurance. They were a commitment to myself, to him, and to the people who loved me. I'll rest, I'll recover, I'll listen. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension easing slightly as if the promise itself had lightened the weight in the air. Jungkook leaned back, but his hand never left mine, a tether and reminder of the trust we had rebuilt in the hours since the collapse. Later, as the night deepened and the outside world quieted, I found myself reflecting on the precariousness of our lives in the industry, the unrelenting schedules, the pressure to perform flawlessly, the silent toll it took on our bodies and minds. But in the hospital, with the people who truly cared about me, I understood a new form of strength. It wasn't measured in perfection or endurance. It was measured in vulnerability, in connection, in letting others hold you when you couldn't hold yourself. Jungkook remained a constant presence, his gaze steady, his hand intertwined with mine. He had been broken, vulnerable, raw in his emotions, yet it was his presence that strengthened me. It wasn't dramatic or showy. It was quiet, persistent, unwavering. In that moment, I realized that love and care could be more powerful than any rehearsal, any performance, any accolade. The members settled into their own routines of quiet vigilance. Some sat, some leaned, some paced lightly, but all remained tethered to me in ways that made the world outside the hospital seem distant, irrelevant. I had always believed I carried the weight alone. Now, I understood that carrying it together made it not just bearable, but survivable. Hours passed in this slow rhythm. I drifted in and out of consciousness, each waking moment filled with the steady presence of Jungkook and the others. They whispered encouragements, brushed a hand over mine, adjusted blankets, checked monitors, small acts that cumulatively built a fortress around me. Each act reinforced the truth I was slowly absorbing. I did not have to be invincible. I did not have to bear everything silently. I could rest, I could lean, I could survive, supported by those who loved me without condition. Jungkook bent closer once more, voice low and tremulous. We're going to get through this together, always. You hear me? I hear you, I whispered, my throat tight with emotion. Together. And in that simple human affirmation, I felt the first tentative stirrings of true recovery, not just of my body, but of my heart, my mind, and the fragile but undeniable bonds that connected us. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The night had grown deeper, and the soft hum of the hospital machines filled the spaces between thoughts. The room was quiet, but the silence wasn't empty. It carried weight, a mix of relief, lingering fear, and the unspoken gratitude we all shared. I lay back against the crisp sheets, letting the monitor's steady beeping anchor me, while Jungkook stayed close, his hand still intertwined with mine. His presence had become my tether, a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed so desperately. I felt myself drifting, but even in the semi-conscious haze, I was aware of every subtle movement around me. RM stood by the window, eyes scanning the monitors, but also watching the quiet patterns of my breathing, the subtle shifts in my expressions. Jin had brought a blanket over my legs, tucking it around me gently, an almost parental gesture that sent warmth through my chest. J-Hope leaned against the wall, his head tipped back, eyes closed, breathing in rhythm with mine as if we were syncing ourselves unconsciously. Suga remained in his corner, silent but unwavering, a constant presence that reminded me that strength didn't always need words to be felt. Taehyung, Jungkook's voice was soft, almost reverent. I need to know you understand. You can't do this again. You can't push yourself this far. Not for us, not for anyone, not for yourself. I swallowed, the words lodging in my throat. I know, I whispered, though the full weight of understanding had only begun to settle. It wasn't just acknowledgement. It was a realization that had been forced upon me painfully and relentlessly. Every ache in my chest, every tremor in my hands, every flicker of fear in Jungkook's eyes, they were truths I couldn't ignore anymore. He reached over, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and his fingers lingered against my skin, grounding me in the reality that I wasn't alone. I was so scared, he admitted quietly. I thought I might lose you, and I don't know how I'd live with that. I couldn't I couldn't handle it. The intensity of his words made my chest tighten. I had always believed that I needed to be strong for everyone else, to bear the weight of expectations, schedules, and dreams without faltering. But now, faced with Jungkook's raw vulnerability, I realized strength wasn't about enduring alone. Strength was about letting others in, allowing them to hold you when you couldn't hold yourself. The hours moved slowly, measured by the soft clicks of the monitors and the occasional murmur of a nurse checking vitals. Jungkook didn't leave my side once, and the other members maintained their quiet vigilance, each contributing to a cocoon of care around me. Their presence was not dramatic, not performative. It was subtle, consistent, unwavering. Taehyung, Suga's voice broke the quiet, low and calm. We need to talk about what led to this, not to blame, but to understand, so it doesn't happen again. I nodded slowly. I I pushed too hard. I ignored the signs. I thought I could handle it all, but I couldn't. I see that now. Jin leaned forward, resting an arm on his knees. You weren't just ignoring your body, you were ignoring all of us. Your absence, even for a moment, would have left a void none of us could fill. We can't bear that kind of risk again. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of their words sink in. The truth was undeniable. I had been careless, not maliciously, but in a way that endangered not just myself, but the people who loved me most. And the realization was humbling, terrifying, and oddly comforting all at once. J-Hope reached out, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. This isn't just about rest, Taehyung. It's about trust. Trusting us to catch you, to support you, to love you without conditions. We've been patient, but tonight was a wake-up call. You can't carry everything alone. Jungkook squeezed my hand again, eyes glistening. I don't care about schedules, rehearsals, or expectations anymore. All I care about is you staying alive, staying here with me. You hear me? I hear you, I whispered, my voice trembling. The words felt insufficient, but they were all I could give. In that simple acknowledgement, I felt a shift inside, a tentative, fragile acceptance that I was allowed to lean, allowed to rest, allowed to survive. RM stepped closer, voice steady and calm. We need to make a plan, not just for tonight, not just for this hospitalization, but for the future. Schedules will need adjusting, practices will need limits, you will need care, consistent and intentional, or this will happen again. I nodded. The enormity of responsibility, not just my own, but shared, settling in my chest. This wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Survival didn't mean ignoring limits. It meant recognizing them and building around them. Hours passed in this rhythm. We spoke quietly about adjustments, precautions, and care routines. Jungkook remained close, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply existing near me, a reminder that I wasn't navigating this alone. The other members contributed where they could, offering insights, support, and presence without forcing conversation. The room became a sanctuary, a fragile yet tangible manifestation of care, love, and concern. At some point, I felt myself drifting, the exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline that had carried me this far. Jungkook's fingers tightened gently around mine, a silent promise that he would remain, a tether I could cling to even in unconsciousness. The monitor's steady beeping became a lullaby, each pulse a reminder of survival, of life, of the fragile yet indomitable human spirit. When I awoke again hours later, the room had shifted subtly. Night had deepened further, the fluorescent lights dimmed to softer tones. Jungkook was still there, eyes half closed, but watching me with an intensity that made me feel profoundly seen. RM had moved to the window, still vigilant. Suga and Jin were quietly resting near corners, their presence calm but unwavering. J-Hope's head tilted slightly as he murmured softly to himself, probably reflecting, probably ensuring all was as it should be. I turned my head slowly toward Jungkook. His gaze met mine instantly, and in that moment, the depth of care, love, and fear he had carried became undeniably clear. His eyes shimmered with the memory of earlier terror, but also with a quiet relief that I was still here, still breathing, still alive. I don't know how I got through it, he admitted softly, voice trembling. Seeing you like that, I can't imagine doing it again. I can't. You don't have to, I whispered, reaching out to brush his hand gently. We'll face it together, not alone. The words hung in the air, more powerful than any promise I had ever made on stage, in public, or to myself. This was a promise anchored in truth, in vulnerability, in the shared reality of fear, care, and love. In that small, quiet room, surrounded by people who refused to leave, I realized something essential. I was not alone, and I didn't have to be strong for everyone else at the cost of myself. Jungkook's fingers intertwined with mine once more, tighter this time, as if sealing the unspoken pact. Together, he whispered. Together, I echoed, feeling the word resonate through every part of me. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of true healing not just of my body, but of my heart, my mind, and the fragile, beautiful connections that had always surrounded me, even when I refused to acknowledge them. As the night deepened and the city outside quieted further, I let myself rest fully, surrendering to the care, love, and presence of the people who mattered most. The road to recovery would be long, intentional, and careful, but I was no longer alone. I had Jungkook, I had the members, and I had the realization that true strength came from letting others carry you when you could no longer carry yourself. And in that moment, I allowed myself to believe that survival, care, and love could coexist not as luxuries, but as essential truths. As we sit here together, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to my members who never left my side. Thank you to my fans who send me strength even when I can't see it. Thank you to everyone who cares, even in ways I might never fully understand. Your love, your support, it keeps me going. I promise I'll take care of myself and I'll keep going, not just for me, but for all of you. Thank you truly from the bottom of my heart.